Good evening and welcome to this edition of History Highballs as part of the North Carolina Museum of History's History at Home initiative. We're so glad that you're joining us for this evening's program, History Highballs, Oakwood Cemetery, The Spirits of Raleigh, with Robin Simonton, Executive Director of Historic Oakwood Cemetery. My name is Stacy and I handle adult education over at the museum, so whenever you sign up for one of these History Highballs programs, you and I will virtually get to spend the evening together listening to some incredible stories about North Carolina places and people and what makes our state so special. Tonight's program is just one of many exciting digital offerings available through our MOH History at Home initiative. So if you'd like to learn more, we invite you to head over to the museum's website at www.ncmuseumofhistory.org. We would also like to take this opportunity to thank our North Carolina Museum of History Associates and Foundation for making this evening's event possible. Our associates and foundation provide crucial funding and support, which, in addition to many other things, helps make programming like this evening's program happen. If you'd like to learn more about becoming an associates member, you can head over to their website at www.ncmoha.com. We would also like to thank those of you who graciously donated funds towards this evening's program. Donations towards this evening's program will be going to Bloom Here. To learn more about their incredible work supporting women in our community, you can head to their website at bloom-here.org. If you haven't already used the link in your Eventbrite email to check out the tutorial for this evening's specially themed cocktail, the Antiguo Margarita, with special guest bartenders May Caudillo and Angela Salamanca, we invite you to head over to the museum's YouTube channel and check it out. Angela is the owner of Centro Mexican Restaurant and Gallo Pelon Mezcaleria here in downtown Raleigh. This cocktail is not only delicious, but you also get to learn about the origins of the margarita and how to make the best version possible for yourself at home. A few quick housekeeping items for this evening. We ask that you please keep your mics muted throughout the entirety of the program, and that you type any questions that you have for our speaker into the chat function located at the bottom center of your screen. After the talk, fellow MOH educator Nancy Pennington will ask the speaker as many of your questions as time allows. So it is my honor to introduce this evening's speaker, Robin Simonton, Executive Director of Historic Oakwood Cemetery. Robin holds a BA in U.S. History from the University of Hawaii and an MA from Eastern Illinois University. She has been executive director of this historic Raleigh cemetery since November 2011. To start off this evening's program, we're going to share a video of Robin taking us on a virtual tour of Oakwood Cemetery, and then we'll hear from Robin.
For over 150 years, Oakwood Cemetery has served our community as a final resting place for those that lived and worked in Raleigh. For generations, families have come here to pay their final respects, come back to visit, and to remember. Oakwood is located near the heart of downtown Raleigh. It is considered part of the rural cemetery movement. It also plays other important roles. A natural wildlife habitat, home to hawks, foxes, deer, and more, as well as a place for all citizens of Raleigh to enjoy. Oakwood was created as a park-like setting before Raleigh's own Pullen Park. So for over a century and a half, our community continues to explore our grounds, enjoy our nature, and learn a little bit of our history. Hi, I'm Robin Simonton, Executive Director of Historic Oakwood Cemetery. Today I'm going to take you on a little bit of a tour so we can learn about the history that we call Oakwood. Here at Oakwood Cemetery, all of us have our favorite stops on our tours, our favorite stories about the people who rest here. This happens to be one of my favorite stories. This is the grave of Louise Bunker Haynes. She was the sixth child and fifth daughter of Chang and Louise Bunker. Their names may not be familiar to you, but perhaps when I tell you that Chang and his brother Ang were known as the Siamese twins, it may ring a bell. Chang, her father, and Ang, her uncle, were the conjoined twins from Thailand. They traveled the globe and retired in Mount Airy, North Carolina. It is there that Chang and Ang met two sisters, and they married them after falling in love. And they had 10 and 11 children each. Louise and her brother were both born deaf, so they came to Raleigh to attend the North Carolina School for the Deaf. It's there that she met Zacharias Haynes, one of her teachers. He was also deaf from the scarlet fever as a 12-year-old. They fell in love, they married, and they had 10 children. Most of the children rest here around them. If you are a sports fan like I am, then you may remember when Lorenzo Charles made this amazing shot over Akeem Olajuwon to give NC State University's men's basketball team the 1983 national championship. When that shot went in, Valvano, Lorenzo's head coach, who's buried just up the hill from here, goes running out onto the court, looking for someone to hug to celebrate the victory, and he finds our own Lorenzo Charles. Lorenzo becomes an immediate sports icon. I mean, he shot this basket over a future NBA superstar. Amazing. The shot heard around the world. Lorenzo ends up being a bus driver for a charter bus company. Can you imagine signing up for a bus tour, getting on the bus, and seeing Lorenzo Charles as your driver? Lorenzo was so gracious. He posed for 1 million pictures with all these people, a sports icon. It's, however, in that same type of bus that Lorenzo suffers a health issue in 2011 while he's on I-40 driving over a cloverleaf exit ramp and crashes the bus and is tragically killed. It was at the request of the family and NC State University that Lorenzo be buried as close to Jimmy V as possible. In 2011, this was the closest space to his beloved coach. And so he rests here, just down the hill. And Wake Monument donated his beautiful black granite stone to match his coach's monument. Except on the back of Lorenzo's stone is engraved the 1983 version of Tuffy, the mascot for NC State. So from Valvano, you can always see Lorenzo. Here we are at the grave of Elizabeth Delia Dixon Carroll, Raleigh's first female physician. When she wanted to attend medical school, it became clear she was not welcome in North Carolina to attend medical school because she was a female. So she left the state to attend elsewhere and returned to Raleigh after her studies to sit for the medical exam. On the day she sat for that exam, she scored #1 in the group of people who took it. That group was made up entirely of men, except for her. So she beat all the men on that test. She went on to oversee health and sanitation at what became Meredith College. And in fact, under her tenure, she kept the girls safe during the Spanish flu. She taught health and physiology while at Meredith until her death from a car accident in Cameron Village in 1934. She was an advocate during her day for many social causes. She rests here in the Carroll family lot next to her husband. While she was Raleigh's first female physician, and today we applaud that, her headstone does not note that, simply stating her name and dates and who she was the wife of. Her husband, who served as a dentist, has a doctor, interestingly enough, on his headstone. Here we are at the grave of Judge Walter Mackenzie Clark. Judge Clark was from Halifax, North Carolina, and after the Civil War, he opened a law office. In 1885, this led to an appointment to the Superior Court and a long career on the bench. In 1902, he won a contentious election as Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court. He was also an economic and social reformer. He supported the popular elections of U.S. senators, child labor laws, and women's suffrage. A prolific writer, he penned over 3,200 legal opinions across his career. Justice Clark was a leader in urging North Carolina to adopt the 1893 motto, translated to be rather than to seem. Oakwood Cemetery is a cemetery that today reflects all of the people of our great city and state. But it also reflects our greatest moments as well as our most tragic. We are at the grave of Farouk Basizio, who was born in 1989 and passed tragically in 2014. Farouk was a Raleigh boy. He played for St. David's, went to St. David's School, was the captain of their soccer team, led them to 2 state championships in 2006 and 2007. He played soccer for NC State and then joined what was then called the Carolina Railhawks and played on their 2011 championship team. In 2014, he reached his dream of becoming a professional soccer player and played for the football club in Finland. It was in 2014, however, that he also went to Prague on a family vacation and unfortunately passed away. Farouk was known for many things: a lover of life, a soccer star, always cheering for the underdog, and a lover of music. He was known as a rapper under the name of Say So as well. Farouk's monument is carved by Paris Alexander, a local Raleigh artist. On it is the symbolized word in Arabic for mother, which was tattooed on his wrist. I'll never forget Farouk's funeral. His pallbearers all had NC State colored red ties, red Converse All-Stars, and they, in a very emotional moment, lifted up his casket onto their shoulders and carried Farouk here to his grave. A young man gone too soon with an amazing legacy of athletics and, most importantly, of being a good person. While he lived a short life, he lived his life to the fullest. So here we are at the grave of Carl Larson. Where do we start about our good friend Carl Larson? Well, Carl was known, as his headstone says, as a Raleigh boy, but he was born in Connecticut, but moved to North Carolina within the year of his birth. He became a graphic designer for the Communications Services section of the North Carolina State University Department of Agriculture. But it's when he retired that he found his passion, working part-time in the photographic collection of the North Carolina Department of Archives. And it's where we meet Carl Larson. He becomes a good friend of the cemetery staff and volunteers as we work on our book about the history of Oakwood Cemetery. Carl, with his co-workers Ian Dunn and Kim Anderson, help us select the right historic photographs for the book about the cemetery. And it's where the fun began. Carl had a great laugh, and we learned so much from him and the team at the archives, and he became our go-to person when we needed anything about architecture in Raleigh or historic folks. Anytime we had a question we couldn't answer, Carl could answer it. For those that knew Carl and knew that sometimes he didn't always agree with our ideas, when he didn't agree with us, he would say something to the effect of, well, I don't know about that. And today, that's also what's engraved on his headstone. Carl is buried here at his request in Oakwood Cemetery at our green burial ground. When we worked with the family to help select his site, we chose the site right in front of an iconic tree, the state tree of North Carolina, the longleaf pine. One iconic part of North Carolina to another. Carl, an icon himself. Thank you for joining me on a tour of Historic Oakwood Cemetery. Remember, these are just a few of the thousands of stories of the people that rest here at Oakwood. You're invited to come and visit Oakwood for yourself. We're open 7 days a week during visiting hours. Here you can enjoy our grounds, learn the history, and enjoy the nature that surrounds us. To learn more about Oakwood Cemetery, our programs and services, please visit our website at historicoakwoodcemetery.org. Remember, Oakwood Cemetery is truly a cemetery full of life, and it reflects the lives of those that called Raleigh and our great state, North Carolina, home.
Okay, well, thank you so much to Stacy and to the Museum of History and the staff, Michael, who put up with me all these weeks to get that video just right, and who had the creative genius to put all of that together. It's been a hard 8 months or so. We haven't given any public tours. And so maybe I was a little bit out of practice giving a tour in front of a camera. And I wanted to thank Angela and May for the drink, the spirits part of the spirit. Our partnership with Centro is so important, and it seemed like a natural partnership to have them make our drink tonight. But here is a picture of Oakwood Cemetery, the front gate, the symbol that many of you may think about when you think about Oakwood, the entrance, a beautiful entryway built in about 1910, which has been our symbol ever since. But this is also our new symbol, as I like to call it. I'm a big Cubs fan. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, near Chicago, I should say. And when I was a kid and the lights went up on Wrigley Field for the first time, oh, was I excited. And I was just as excited this summer when the lights lit up our gates at Oakwood Cemetery. I had never seen it. This picture was taken in June, right after the first night the lights were lit. And oh my gosh, I got to see it last Friday when I was giving a private tour, and it is even better in person. So let me gush a little bit about that, but I invite you all to drive past it after dark because it is a spectacular, a spectacular scene, even more excited than I was when Wrigley Field got lit up. But this is Oakwood Cemetery. It's what we have always been, a place for families to say goodbye, to have that funeral, that all-important moment as we remember and honor the lives or a life well lived. But we've always been this as well. And this is a scene not many people have seen of Oakwood Cemetery, but it is one of our original small bodies of water. And you can see someone actually canoeing in that picture. So remember, we are older than, like the video said, than Pullen Park. And this is a place where families came not only to honor their loved ones, but also to socialize. This is where families would go on horse and carriage rides, where people would canoe in our ponds, where young couples would go on dates. So we've obviously always been a place for funerals, but always been a social center. But did you know that we were also this? For multiple years, we were part of the NC State Star Party and the NC State Science Festival. Even though we're only 8 blocks from the governor's mansion and we have sometimes some light issues, we are a great place to stargaze, and we have had many people on our grounds to enjoy the sights. But we're also this. This is one of our volunteers, Sue Perkis. We did an event on 9/11 with our partnership with Activate Good to honor our law enforcement a few years ago and first responders. And we had goodie bags through Activate Good to give to our local police, firefighters, and EMTs and dogs that search for people who need help. And we're also this is one of my favorite events we've ever done, a small event, a coloring book night. We have a wonderful photographer in residence who takes photographs of the cemetery, and he turned so many of his beautiful photographs into coloring book pages. And then we had an adult coloring book night in our boardroom. And of course, we're living in 2020 where so many of these activities just haven't been able to happen. But I'm giving you a sneak peek of some of them so that you can know when we return back to a little more normal times what maybe you'll look for and mark on your calendar. But a fun event coloring those wonderful images that we love about Oakwood. But perhaps there is no busier time than fall. And if you watch the Highballs portion with Angela and May, Angela said something that I thought was so meaningful for her in terms of making a drink, but also for us in terms of the history of Oakwood Cemetery. She talked about savoring the spirit of the drink. But I urge you to remember that we savor the spirits, the memories of those that lived before every day at Oakwood Cemetery, not just in the fall. But by honoring those that came before us, we are savoring the spirits and what our heart remembers about those that we loved. And these are 3 pictures from 3 different years. The one on the left is the most recent one of our ofrendas. If you have seen Coco, you may be familiar with the idea of an ofrenda, which is an altar to call home the lives that we loved that are now no longer with us. And this is an altar of remembrance, I like to call it. It is up in our front field. The one on the left is the one that was just put up yesterday. Like I said, this picture is not of it finished. There are mums that were not put out when I took this picture yesterday. But all members of our community, whether you have a loved one buried at Oakwood or not, or you're invited to come and place a photo of your loved one or a prayer card on the altar, and then we will save them and return as much as we can for next year. And this is the 6th year of our partnership with Centro and the Boys and Girls Club, and many times the city of Raleigh, to put these altars up. And thanks to our partnership with Centro, for the past 5 years, we have been part of the route for the Day of the Dead 5K. And obviously, with COVID-19 this year, there is no Day of the Dead 5K. But this is an event where like 600 to 800 people at least come onto our grounds, run from downtown, run past the altar in the front field, and run through our grounds to support the Boys and Girls Club, the Brentwood Boys and Girls Club. So this is another way that Oakwood is a cemetery full of life. Here's another picture of some of the shenanigans that happen. What's so neat about this event, it's become such a tradition at Oakwood Cemetery, is that we have water stations throughout the route and on our grounds. And what we have seen in the past few years is that volunteers, they represent different families at Oakwood Cemetery, and they create these little teams and they ask to handle the water stations, and they do it in memory of their loved one that's at Oakwood. So an event that, besides me being there, is entirely staffed by volunteers to support our community. And many of them are doing it in memory of someone who is buried in the cemetery. So it's just a nice kind of homecoming activity for us. But the cemetery is lively all year long. On December 19th of this year, we will do Wreaths Across America for the 8th year at Oakwood Cemetery. We started 8 years ago with 12 wreaths sponsored for our veterans' graves, and they were thrown over the gate, the front arch, by FedEx in 3 boxes. Last year, an 18-wheeler came and dropped off 1,200 wreaths from Maine. It smells divine when you open the back of that truck. This year, our sponsorships are down, and if you would like to sponsor a wreath for Oakwood Cemetery through Wreaths Across America, you may go to their website and search Friends of Oakwood Cemetery, and you will find our sponsorship site. But we try to cover the wreaths in the Field of Honor, and then throughout the grounds for folks that have veterans stones. It's an event typically with about 400 people. So we'll have to figure out a way to do it. But kids and family members of all ages come for a brief ceremony, and then they place wreaths. Memorial Day is really our signature event each year. And Memorial Day is a day where we honor those that have given their all for our country, and also those that have served our great nation. An event put on by a committee of volunteers. On the picture on the left is our committee liaison with our board of directors, Charlie Silver, with Betsy Hutchison, who was a woman in her upper 90s who fought in World War II. And there she is in her uniform. So it's a great way, a great patriotic way, another huge military event where we honor those that have served our country. But we're alive in so many ways. We've had in the past a musician in residence. This is Philip Sasser in the center. He was our musician in residence. He wrote a song that if you've ever listened to our virtual tours on our YouTube channel, our virtual tour episodes all open and close with a song that he wrote for us in that building, the House of Memory. So we've had concerts in there and done all kinds of neat ways to showcase his music. But we would be nothing without the help of volunteers. On the top left is the grave of Rachel Blythe Bauer, a woman that was buried in 1898 in Oakwood. She has what we call like a bed behind her grave, which is to represent the empty bed at home. Those beautiful mums you see behind her headstone were planted by volunteer Madonna Phillips, who tends to Rachel's grave for us, making sure Rachel's grave looks as it should have looked, was intended to look when it was designed. The bottom photo is a photo of our photographer in residence, Michael Pelko. He's one of my partners in crime, I like to say. He's taken on the volunteer job of photographer in residence about 5 years ago. And it has grown to a huge volunteer job, I'm sure he may admit to, where he also handles a lot of our social media and undertakes big projects. The last time I texted him and said, I have an idea, before even knowing what it was, he said, I'm in. So I'm very grateful for all the hard work Michael does. I could not do my job without him. But the glue of our organization is Bruce Miller, who is in the photograph with volunteer Lynn Andrews at our 150th anniversary gala taken a year ago. Bruce Miller has been the cemetery's historian for over 15 years and really is key to our success in terms of understanding the history of Raleigh, the history of North Carolina, and specifically those that rest at Oakwood. He is far more than the glue. He is really a man that knows everything we need when we need it, and before we even need it, he knows how to help us. And I could not do my job without him and all of these key volunteers. We're known for some interesting exhibitions and activities that we host in the sacred space of our mausoleum. On the left is a picture of an artist from Charleston who came down to teach a class on hair work. Hair work, if you're not familiar with it, is the idea of how Victorians braided hair to make into jewelry. On the right is a picture of Lord Hayden Peters, who has come the past 2 winters to a crowd of about 50 to 60 people from 8 different states. He comes from Australia and he teaches a 3-hour course on mourning jewelry, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, about how from the 1600s through the Victorian era, how people have expressed the grief and the love for their loved ones through jewelry. And our keystone event that we held a number of years ago and hope to do again was a national urn competition. And yes, you heard me right. Urn as in cremation or burial urn competition. A committee of volunteers worked diligently to get this event to get together. We received 95 entries from 17 states in all different mediums, and they were amazing. And it was a rainy Sunday afternoon when our art show happened, but we had over 300 folks come through the mausoleum to enjoy the look of, to get a glimpse of these unique burial urns. We do meaningful programs, we try to. As part of our 150th year of celebration, Michael Pelko and I, our photographer in residence, unveiled the Death Letter Project in partnership in some ways with Duke University, who helped do a sneak peek at Duke Hospital before we started releasing them in January of 2019. The Death Letter Project was where we asked people from across the state of North Carolina to write us a handwritten letter about what death means to them and how they've learned from death. And then Michael would go and take their photographs, and then we'd scan in their handwritten letters and release them. If you're interested in learning more, you can access that on our website as well. This is a photograph of Reverend Stephen Lyons, a local funeral director, and part of his letter that he wrote to us about life and death. We release letters twice a month, every month for the 2019 year, and we have a few more to go, but we just had to put a pause on it because of the pandemic. As any historic site, we face preservation issues. And with over 25,000 graves and so many monuments, of course, a tree could look at a monument strangely and cause the monument to break and just sometimes wear and tear. And we rely on generous donations from our families and friends of the cemetery to help us restore monuments. This is a picture of a cross, a freestanding cross that broke a couple years ago, and part of the way we went through the process to restore it. If you're familiar with Oakwood Cemetery, you may be familiar with this building, which for many years looked like the building on the left. Multiple colors, a little run down. If you've been here recently, you may recognize the building on the right, the same structure, but restored with a generous donation. This building is our receiving vault, designed in about 1896, designed by architect A.G. Bauer, and built by the Cooper brothers, a monument company in town. It was used to store bodies when for some reason they could not be buried. Either we hit rock or they were building a mausoleum or something. And when it was built, it cost $5 to put a body in it and $2 a month rent, and a casket could only stay in there for 6 months. It took more than 6 months, however, to restore this structure back to how it originally looked. It's brownstone, just like the governor's mansion, as A.G. Bauer was the architect of the governor's mansion. And it is in fine condition now after a complete restoration and renovation of it. This is the preservationist that restored the receiving vault for us. This is Dean Riedrich, seen with me upon the near completion of the building. Tragically, we lost Dean nearly 2 years ago, but this was, we love to celebrate our successes, and the restoration of this building was a huge success for both of us. I think we both cared about this building so much, and to see it look like this today is a testament to his fine preservation skills. So we are many things to many people. Some folks may only come once a year to visit a loved one. Some folks may run through the cemetery every day to exercise. But if you've heard of Oakwood Cemetery, you probably have an idea of what it means to you in your mind. But more than anything, we are a place to remember and honor those that came before. And some of the pictures I showed you tonight and through the stories we aired a little earlier, that is how we honor all those folks that are buried at Oakwood Cemetery in a way to continually tell their stories, to tell the story of our fine city. I guess we'll open it up to questions now, if that's okay, Stacy.
Absolutely, yes. Nancy, I think we have a couple questions in the chat.
There we go. Okay, Robin, we have a question about, are there any ghost stories for Halloween?
So we at Oakwood Cemetery, not to be a spoil sport, but we don't celebrate Halloween as an active burial ground. Out of respect for the families that we serve, we don't celebrate Halloween. And so we don't have ghost stories that we tell either. But I will tell you, don't be afraid to drive through Oakwood Cemetery during visiting hours. You will see how many of our families celebrate and decorate for Halloween. And many people have a very unique spin on how they decorate their loved ones' graves. So while I don't have any ghost stories to tell, know that many people have a fun way to celebrate Halloween with using of their own, how they decorate their own graves.
Okay. Do you do garden tours?
No. We do a lot of tours for garden clubs, and I try to glean as much information from the garden clubs as I can about the plantings, especially the historic plantings that exist at Oakwood Cemetery. So if any garden club would like to help us and help us identify some of these plants and help us maintain some of these plants, we would love it. And one of the future goals I have for Oakwood is to, just like Madonna Phillips, planted and maintains the grave of Rachel Blythe Bauer with those beautiful plantings that she put in. We would like to create a garden club like that at Oakwood, where people adopt a grave and plant and tend to the grave of a historic person buried in Oakwood. So that is something that's on my list right
now. Is there a particular artist who creates the monuments?
So the ones like you saw for Ruth Basizio's in the video, That was done by Paris Alexander. Elizabeth Edwards and Wade Edwards monument, which I think we caught a glimpse of Wade's in the video, was done by Robert Mahaley. So 2 local artists in the Triangle. Most monuments, however, that are more standard are done by local monument companies. And there's a handful of them here in the Triangle. And families, you know, if you look at the old sections with the big obelisks and the pillows and the different euphemisms for death on their headstones, that is one style. But if you drive through the newer sections of Oakwood where we're still burying folks, you will see a lot more personalization on headstones. Bow ties carved in, Mack trucks carved in, a feather, like a quill pen if someone was a writer. So families have a lot of input now in headstones with the personalization of death that we see at Oakwood and many other cemeteries. So they're not necessarily done by artists like Paris Alexander or Robert Mahaley, but they are done by monument companies who have graphic designers as part of their team.
Okay. What is the most controversial grave in the graveyard?
That's a good question. I suppose that depends on your opinion of the people that are buried there. It's really hard to say who that would be. I wouldn't want to pinpoint somebody and hurt a family's feelings. But it just depends on your view. I mean, there are people that represent all parties, all backgrounds, all political parties, I mean, and all aspects of history. So while I don't think there's anyone that's more controversial than anyone else, it all just depends on your perspective.
Okay, that helps us jump to another question, which is, was Oakwood segregated and when was it open to integration?
So Oakwood, like many cemeteries of its time in 1869, was a cemetery, while never written in our guidelines, was a cemetery intended only for white people. At some point, we began to bury people of other backgrounds. I mean, we do have Asian Americans buried there from very early on, American Indians buried there before the turn of the last century. But more in the modern era where when other aspects of Raleigh life were desegregating, so was Oakwood. And so in the modern era, Oakwood has always served all people.
So do you have any stories, any short stories about Stuart Scott?
Stuart Scott is not buried at Oakwood.
Okay.
He is in a different cemetery. But not here, not at Oakwood.
How could anyone wanting to volunteer get involved?
Oh, so we have volunteer docents that give tours. We have research volunteers that use our newspaper.com and ancestry accounts that go to the archives when they're open and study activities of, property and things like that of the people that are buried at Oakwood. We also have volunteers that do data entry for us and things like that. So if any of those roles sound interesting to you, you would just call me at the cemetery office or email me at info@historicoakwood.com, and I will be able to connect you with the right peeps to let you have a volunteer opportunity.
Here's a quick one. Are any US presidents buried there?
No US presidents, but a handful of men that did run for US president, but no US presidents are buried at Oakwood.
Okay, a question about a former program. Do you still do a candlelight tour walk that used to be around Halloween with a reenactment?
We are not doing that this year. We're unsure of the way we'll move forward with that in the future. We're supposed to unveil a Legendary Ladies of Oakwood event, which was a candlelight walking tour with costumed interpreters in March. So we're hoping to be able to continue and unveil that when we're able to all gather again.
Okay. What is your oldest grave?
It's kind of a trick question. We started in 1869. February of 1869. We did bury 2 people, 1 person prior to that, once Oakwood, in Oakwood proper. And that was a gentleman in our historic Hebrew section. However, we have been a place where cemeteries have been moved into for the past 30, 40 years. So if there's a DOT project or or development going in and there happens to be an old cemetery. Old cemeteries are, if they can't find any folks and they go through the county or the city process, they occasionally are moved into Oakwood. So with that said, many people are buried at Oakwood that way predate us. One of the earliest graves we know is Major John Hinton, who died, I believe, in 1818. So he and his family and the wall that surrounded his cemetery on his property were moved in about 2009.
Okay. And that leads us into a question about how many plots are left.
So we go by how many acres are left and the current burial rate. So we believe that there are over 200 years of burial spaces left to sell, but obviously more than that to use, because in what we currently use of the cemetery that have already been sold, there's obviously a lot of graves that have been sold but are still left to be buried in.
Okay. So cemeteries, this particular cemetery, was it originally designed with a master plan, or did it just sort of evolve as needed?
It was originally designed with a master plan. It was the Raleigh Cemetery Association, which is the legal name for Oakwood Cemetery, which is run by a board of directors, hired a man by the name of Engelhardt, H.A. Engelhardt, and he was a Prussian man that had come over, and he was a landscape architect, and he designed the original part of Oakwood. So I would say the original third of the cemetery. And we have a beautiful layout, actually, that Carl Larson, if you saw in the video, that he actually found for me in the UNC collection a number of years ago. And it had the ponds and the creek, and it actually had a space even in 1869 for where we eventually put our chapel, which no longer stands today. And so all of this, yes, it was very intentionally designed. It's based, the whole idea of a garden cemetery is based on Père Lachaise outside of Paris from the early 1800s, and then from the early 1830s from Mount Auburn outside of Boston. And so that is a very specific rural or garden cemetery plan. With obviously there's variations, but the curvy roads, the topography being hilly, the water elements, all of that were all part of the original 1869 design that the cemetery hired Engelhardt to do.
Okay, we've got lots of questions here. I'll sort of get to as many as I can. In the wooded section in the north part of the cemetery, there's a dirt road cut through the trees. Are there any future plans for that section?
Well, so behind them, that's a good question. Behind the mausoleum to that dirt road is a big open space, and that's all undeveloped grave space that we haven't yet designed to be able to lay off and eventually sell. We're just not at that point to need that property just yet. And then the dirt road is kind of where we store our extra dirt, if that makes sense. And we put our leaves and our branches there, and all of that will eventually be grave space.
Okay. Why is the cemetery located right in the middle of a neighborhood?
Well, we were there before the neighborhoods were there. So we were considered on the outskirts of town, of downtown. And that is how garden cemeteries were. Originally, graveyards were church graveyards in downtown. And then they began to move outside of town. They were seen as unhealthy things in the 1700s, late 1700s. And by the mid 1830s, they were still outside of town, but now they were a place that people wanted to go to. The neighborhood and St. Aug's all came after us, so everything was built around us, but we were seen as pretty far out from where you would originally be in Raleigh.
Okay, here's another question about a particular person in the cemetery. Is there a most notorious resident?
Well, so I think the most notorious, and this is a great partnership with the Museum of History from a number of years ago. I think that's again another question about what you're, about base what you think notorious is. But I would say Marion Upshaw, who was Margaret Mitchell's first husband. Margaret Mitchell wrote Gone with the Wind, and he was kind of a scoundrel. And they divorced. It was not a pleasant marriage. It was not a pleasant divorce. And she actually married the best man from their wedding after divorcing Marion. But he is who Rhett Butler is based on, according to the Margaret Mitchell House in Atlanta. And so his nickname was Red, which is where Rhett Butler perhaps comes from. His family is buried. Most of his family is buried in another section of Oakwood. He is by himself, except for one brother who was buried later. His stepmother dies of this, his mother dies of the Spanish flu, but his father and his stepmother and most of his siblings are far, far away from him. And he, after a bad hand of cards in Galveston, Texas, either jumps or falls out of a window in a hotel and is brought back to Raleigh. And so he is kind of the scoundrel of the group. And I think he would probably, if he could talk today, tell us he approves of that title. So that was who I would say would be the most notorious.
Okay, we had, I'll jump from history for a little bit here to horticulture. What kind of plants do people opt to place in the green burial area?
That's a good question. So we work closely with families who typically work with nurseries to help us determine what plants to put in. It's hard because we have a lot of deer on our grounds and they are often very hungry and like a lot of plants and trees. So some of it's trial by error. I think our initial goal was all North Carolina plantings, but that is not the way it has turned out. But hardy plants for the most part. There are a lot of tulips that come up in the spring. I think there's, I'm trying to think of what tree that is. There might be a dogwood tree that we recently planted for someone. And then there are families that have made their graves huge garden flower beds. So you see a lot of interesting, beautiful flowers that continue to bloom year after year. So I don't have necessarily a rule of thumb. Families work with our superintendent and we discuss, how big the tree will be, how big the plantings will be, how much care they need to make sure that families can continue to maintain them because we're not able to. And then we make the decision from there.
Okay, I'm going to put two questions together here. Did someone donate all the land for Oakwood? And how much of the current acreage was once Mordecai land?
So we have purchased that property starting in 1869 from the Mordecai family at fair market value and made a couple purchases over time. The vast majority of it is Mordecai family property, however, or was Mordecai family property.
You mentioned the cemetery has been opened in the past for stargazing. Are there any plans to continue that process?
Well, so we have taken a break, not only because of COVID, but from the NC State Star Party, because what we realized through the Science Festival is that there are only so many astronomy groups that have these large telescopes that can partner. And so we stepped back voluntarily so that Dix Park could, which gets less light pollution, could participate in the Star Party a few years ago. But we hope to be able to offer those not during the Star Party, but throughout the year as we move forward, because that way we don't have to compete for the telescopes that we'll need so badly to do that.
Okay. Are there any major historic events that happened at the cemetery? Do you have a favorite story to tell?
Major historic events that happened at the cemetery. I think funerals of like when Elizabeth Edwards was buried or Jesse Helms was buried. I mean, those become, when big name Jimmy Valvano was buried, those become major events in the life of our community. And I would say that any family that has buried a loved one at Oakwood would say that those are some major historic moments. It's hard to say goodbye. So those become milestones in people's lives. Do I have a favorite story? Kind of depends on the day, maybe. But I think my favorite story really is it's just, I said in the video that it's who did I say it was? I said it was the daughter of Chang and niece of Ang, but it's sometimes Louise Bunker Haynes, and sometimes there's this gigantic monument that cost $75,000 in 1930 money, and it's the grave of Ouida Hood, a 12 grave lot, but only Ouida buried there. It's much too long of a story to get into, but know that she's there buried under 40 barrels of Michigan dirt. And as a Midwesterner, I think that is the greatest thing ever. And so it's not Carolina red clay, it is really black dirt that we don't see here in North Carolina very often. So it's a beautiful monument built for her by someone who loved her and then made sure that she was in Michigan when she died so that she had a piece of Michigan with her, which I appreciate.
Speaking of Elizabeth Edwards, we have a question if you have a photo of the monument at Elizabeth Edwards' grave.
I don't think I have it on this computer. I don't think I have it on this computer. I'm sorry. Let me see real quick. Let me look. Her monument is 27 doves being released by 2 hands, and carved by Mahaley, mostly on our property for a few months. It was carved on his property, but then it came here. I'm gonna pull it off the internet. I'm screen sharing right there. So you can, am I still screen sharing? Yes, aren't I? So Elizabeth Edwards is the grave on the right with the doves, and their son Wade is the grave on the left.
Sorry, Robin, what we still see is your slideshow, your PowerPoint.
Okay, hang on. I'm sorry. Thank you. Let me try to reshare my screen. Hold on. Oh, let me get there. Share screen. Okay, here we go. So now can you see it, Nancy?
Yes.
Okay, wow. So Elizabeth Edwards is the monument on the right. That's her headstone. It's those 27 doves being released by 2 hands. Mahaley tells us it's a symbol of forgiveness and remembrance. And the grave on the left is Wade Edwards' grave, their son. It's hard to see, but the surrogate mourner is what I would call her, the angel on top that's there to grieve for Wade when the family is not present. In her hands, she is cradling the image of Wade's face. Both marble, both amazing pieces of art.
Okay, we have a question about, they recall perhaps the Burning Coal Theater put on a Halloween theatrical event in the cemetery.
They don't do it for Halloween. Burning coal typically comes in the fall, however, and sometimes in the spring. They've done it, I think, for the past 15 years or so, where they have playwrights write original plays, short plays about maybe 6 or 7 folks that are buried in the cemetery. They work with our historian, Bruce Miller, to determine a theme, and then the call for playwrights go out. And we obviously had it planned for October of this year, so we hope to be able to continue it again in the future. But it is if you've ever seen Spoon River Anthology, where the folks kind of just come out of the woodwork at the cemetery, it's very Spoon River-esque, and I think it's really a neat experience to see folks come alive and tell their stories in the cemetery.
Okay, we have 2 more.
Okay.
Can you tell us about the section along the fence line near Oakwood Avenue, across the path from Josephus Daniels? The markers there are very small. Children's plot or a type of potter's field?
Okay, so both really. So the closest to Josephus Daniels and that other entrance at the gate of Oakwood Avenue, the far gate closest to St. Aug's, the very first thing closest to that other entrance is our original Babyland section. We call it Babyland. There are 3 Babylands, 3-ish Babylands in the cemetery. We have to remember that when babies died in the late 1800s, families would often buy these 12 or 24 grave plots. And because of the higher rate of infant mortality, they would find themselves burying many of their own children in that plot. As medicine began to be more professionalized, and people were going to hospitals around the turn of the last century, doctors felt that this was not healthy for women to come to the cemetery and to go through this grieving process time and time again. And so cemeteries began to create something called Babylands, kind of a universal cemetery term, strangely, and babies were put with other babies. And that was supposed to be comforting to mothers as we sanitize death and we're no longer feeling those strong emotions that we did when you were dying at home and things like that. So the first section is Babyland, and they do have little tiny numbers. Some of them have headstones, and some people come back, like we had somebody come back 5 years ago and said, hey, this is my great aunt's grave. My great grandparents could never put a headstone on her grave, and they would put a headstone on that grave where that number was. And then as you go closer to the main gates, on Oakwood Avenue. That next section is the original single grave section. Remember, families used to buy graves in 12 or 24 grave lots. So if you only needed one, the cemetery in its original days did not have a single grave to sell you. So they would ask you to purchase property in the single grave section. And those two are typically marked with small numbers as well. And our record books show as best they can from those late 18, early 1900 graves who those numbers belong to. So we have a record of who they were.
Okay, our last one. Any animals or pets buried at Oakwood?
So we are not a pet cemetery, and we do not allow full body burials of animals. However, if you have been cremated, you may be commingled with with the ashes of your pet, and I would not necessarily know. And what's buried in a casket is not always told to us. So I would imagine that there are pets buried at Oakwood, cremated remains of pets, but we do not specifically bury pets at Oakwood Cemetery.
Well, we have lots of thank yous and cools and excellent tour and programs. So thank you so much, Robin.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks so much for helping us share our story. We've missed seeing all of you at Oakwood Cemetery for tours. It's been a weird year for all of us, but we miss seeing all of our visitors and our regular tour folks. So just keep looking on our social media pages and on our website. So hopefully when we can offer tours again, you can join us.
Thank you so much, Robin, for taking us on that incredible tour and for showing us the many facets of Historic Oakwood Cemetery. I know I learned a lot, and I always do whenever I talk to you, and I have a feeling that a lot of other people feel that same way this evening. And thank you to all those of you who joined us for this evening. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we hope that you'll join us for our next History and Highballs program Thursday, November 5th at 7 p.m. via Zoom. We are going to have Dr. Daniel Pierce from UNC Asheville talk to us about North Carolina First in Moonshine, how the state became the moonshine capital of the world. We hope that everyone has a lovely evening. Thank you again, Robin.
Thank you.
And this recording will be available. I know that a few people asked, it will be available and put up on the museum's YouTube channel. And we invite you to join us for our next program. Take care, everybody. Have a good evening.